Happy birthday, Chuck Norris. Carlos Ray Chuck Norris, born March 10, 1940, is an American martial artist and actor. He is a black belt in Tang Soo Do, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. After serving in the United States Air Force, Norris won many martial arts championships and later founded his own discipline Chung Kuk Do. In honor of the master of roundhouse kicks' birthday, I will read you some Chuck Norris facts. Chuck Norris doesn't read books. He stares them down until he gets the information he wants. Time waits for no man. Unless that man is Chuck Norris. If you spell Chuck Norris in Scrabble, you win. Forever. Chuck Norris breathes air 5 times a day. In the beginning there was nothing, then Chuck Norris roundhouse kicked nothing and told it to get a job. Chuck Norris has a mug of nails instead of coffee in the morning. If Chuck Norris were to travel to an alternate dimension in which there was another Chuck Norris and they both fought, they would both win. The dinosaurs looked at Chuck Norris the wrong way once. You know what happened to them. Chuck Norris once roundhouse kicked someone so hard that his foot broke the speed of light. If you ask Chuck Norris what time it is, he always says, 2 seconds till. After you ask, 2 seconds to what, he roundhouse kicks you in the face. Chuck Norris appeared in the Street Fighter II video game, but was removed by beta testers because every button caused him to do a roundhouse kick. When asked about this glitch, Chuck Norris replied, "That's no glitch." Since 1940, the year Chuck Norris was born, roundhouse kick-related deaths have increased 13,000%. Chuck Norris does not own a stove, oven, or microwave, because revenge is a dish best served cold. Chuck Norris does not sleep. He waits. The chief export of Chuck Norris is pain. Chuck Norris recently had the idea to sell his pee as a canned beverage. It's now called Red Bull. If paper beats rock, rock beats scissors, and scissors beats paper, what beats all three at the same time? Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris can dribble a bowling ball. Chuck Norris drinks napalm to fight his heartburn. Chuck Norris roundhouse kick is so powerful, it can be seen from outer space by the naked eye. If you want a list of Chuck Norris enemies, just check the extinct species list. Chuck Norris has never blinked in his entire life. Never. Chuck Norris once shot an enemy plane down with his finger by yelling, "Bang." Chuck Norris does not use spell check. If he happens to misspell a word, Oxford will change the spelling. Some kids pee their name in the snow. Chuck Norris can pee his name into concrete. Chuck Norris calendar goes straight from March 31st to April 2nd because no one fools Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris counted to infinity twice. Chuck Norris can speak Braille. Chuck Norris can have both feet on the ground and kick but at the same time. Chuck Norris can do a wheelie on a unicycle. Once a cobra bit Chuck Norris' leg. After 5 days of excruciating pain, the cobra died. Chuck Norris once won a game of Connect 4 in 3 moves. When the boogeyman goes to sleep every night, he checks his closet for Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris can slam revolving doors. Chuck Norris does not hunt because the word hunting implies the possibility of failure. Chuck Norris goes killing. Chuck Norris can kill 2 stones with 1 bird. Chuck Norris can play the violin with a piano. Chuck Norris makes onions cry. Death once had a near Chuck Norris experience. When Chuck Norris writes, he makes paper bleed. Chuck Norris can strangle you with a cordless phone. Chuck Norris never retreats, he just attacks in the opposite direction. Chuck Norris can build a snowman out of rain. Chuck Norris once punched a man in the soul. Chuck Norris can drown a fish. Chuck Norris once had a heart attack. His heart lost. When Chuck Norris looks in a mirror, the mirror shatters. Because not even glass is dumb enough to get in between Chuck Norris and Chuck Norris. When Chuck Norris enters a room, he doesn't turn the lights on, he turns the dark off. The only time Chuck Norris was ever wrong was when he thought he had made a mistake. Chuck Norris can tie his shoes with his feet. The quickest way to a man's heart is with Chuck Norris's fist. Chuck Norris is the only person that can punch a cyclops between the eye. Chuck Norris used to beat up his shadow because it was following to close. It now stands 15 feet behind him. There has never been a hurricane named Chuck because it would have destroyed everything. Outer space exists because it's afraid to be on the same planet with Chuck Norris. When Chuck Norris does a push-up, he's pushing the Earth down. Chuck Norris is the reason why Waldo is hiding. Chuck Norris doesn't wear a watch. He decides what time it is. Chuck Norris does not get frostbite. Chuck Norris bites frost. In Pamplona, Spain, the people may be running from the bulls, but the bulls are running from Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris spices up his steaks with pepper spray. The Great Wall of China was originally created to keep Chuck Norris out. It didn't work. Chuck Norris can get in a bucket and lift it up with himself in it. Most people have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Chuck Norris has 72, and they're all lethal. Chuck Norris is the only man to ever defeat a brick wall in a game of tennis. Chuck Norris doesn't shower, he only takes blood baths. Chuck Norris can divide by zero. The show Survivor had the original premise of putting people on an island with Chuck Norris. There were no survivors. Chuck Norris destroyed the periodic table because Chuck Norris only recognizes the element of surprise. Chuck Norris once kicked a horse in the chin. Its descendants are now known as giraffes. When Chuck Norris was born, the only person who cried was the doctor. Never slap Chuck Norris. When Chuck Norris does division, there are no remainders. It takes Chuck Norris 20 minutes to watch 60 minutes. Chuck Norris proved that we are alone in the universe. We weren't before his first space expedition. Chuck Norris once went skydiving, but promised never to do it again. One Grand Canyon is enough. Chuck Norris once ordered a steak in a restaurant. The steak did what it was told. We live in an expanding universe. All of it is trying to get away from Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris had to stop washing his clothes in the ocean. Too many tsunamis. Chuck Norris can sneeze with his eyes open. Chuck Norris can cook minute rice in 30 seconds. Chuck Norris beat the sun in a staring contest. Superman owns a pair of Chuck Norris undies. Chuck Norris doesn't breathe, he holds air hostage. Chuck Norris can clap with one hand. Chuck Norris doesn't need to shave. His beard is scared to grow. Before he forgot a gift for Chuck Norris, Santa Claus was real. In an average living room, there are 1,000 objects Chuck Norris could use to kill you, including the room itself. Chuck Norris invented airplanes because he was tired of being the only person that could fly. Chuck Norris's belly button is actually a power outlet. Freddy Krueger has nightmares about Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris is the only man who can fight himself and win. Chuck Norris cowboy boots are made from real cowboys. Chuck Norris can start a fire with an ice cube. The flu gets a Chuck Norris shot every year. Chuck Norris is so fast he can run around the world and punch himself in the back of the head. When Chuck Norris was a baby he farted for the first time, that is when the Big Bang first happened. Chuck Norris was exposed to COVID-19. COVID-19 had to go into quarantine for a month. Chuck Norris is able to build a snowman out of water. Chuck Norris didn't call the wrong number, you answered the wrong phone. Chuck Norris didn't cheat death, he won fairly and squarely. Chuck Norris once wrestled a bear, an alligator, and a tiger all at once. He won by tying them together with an anaconda. If you put your ear next to a seashell, you hear the ocean. If you put your ear next to Chuck Norris boot, you hear the opening riff to Scorpions rock you like a hurricane. When Alexander Graham Bell first invented the telephone, he had 3 missed calls from Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris doesn't pay taxes, taxes pay Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris once had an arm wrestling contest with Superman. I'm not going to say who won, but the loser had to wear his underwear on the outside for the rest of his life. Chuck Norris lost his virginity before his father did. When Chuck Norris was born, the doctor asked him to name his parents. George Lucas couldn't cast Chuck Norris as Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars trilogy. If he did, it would be only 8 minutes long. 7 of those minutes are for the intros and credits. Chuck Norris never needs to flush the toilet. He always scares the crap out of it. The laws of physics always bend the rules for Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris didn't get a COVID-19 vaccine. COVID-19 got a Chuck Norris vaccine. Chuck Norris eats his meat so rare that he only eats unicorns and dragons. Chuck Norris once played Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun and won. Whenever Chuck Norris leaves a room, the Foo Fighters' My Hero starts to play out of nowhere. Chuck Norris played a game of rock, paper, scissors against his reflection, and won. When Chuck Norris went to Burger King and ordered a Big Mac, they made it for him, perfectly. The Swiss Army uses Chuck Norris knives. A condom puts on protection to avoid becoming impregnated by Chuck Norris on date night. Chuck Norris is able to start a fire using an extinguisher. Chuck doesn't need to throw out the trash, it always throws itself out. Chuck Norris is able to recycle toxic waste. Chuck Norris has to carry a concealed weapons permit when he wears his regular clothes. When Chuck once roundhouse kicked a coal mine and turned it into a diamond mine. Chuck Norris doesn't strike gold, gold is the byproduct of Chuck Norris roundhouse kicking rocks. When police officers approach Chuck Norris, they say, "We have the right to remain silent." When Chuck Norris lifts weights, the weights get in shape. When Chuck Norris enters a building that is on fire, the Chuck Norris alarm rings. When Thanos snapped his fingers, he disappeared. Chuck Norris doesn't like snapping. The sun has to wear sunglasses when Chuck Norris glances at it. When Chuck Norris looked into the abyss looked the other way. The Grand Canyon was formed when Chuck Norris was doing a triathlon. Chuck Norris was on the swimming leg. Bigfoot is still hiding because he once saw Chuck Norris walking in the mountains. When Chuck Norris drops the soap in prison, he picks it up successfully. The Loch Ness Monster claims to have seen Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris can drink a whole glass of beer. Yep, even the glass. When Chuck Norris uses the internet, he can skip ads whenever he wants. Ads are not able to skip Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris doesn't negotiate with terrorists. The terrorists negotiate with Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris won an arm wrestling tournament, with both arms tied behind his back. The roundhouse kick name was born when Chuck Norris kicked around an entire house. Chuck Norris got a divorce and was asked to give half his assets and property away. Chuck Norris proceeded to chop the entire universe in half with his bare hands. The Flash discovered how to run at the speed of light when he discovered Chuck Norris was looking for him. When Chuck goes bowling, he doesn't get every pin with a single bowl, he gets every pin in the bowling alley. The reason why people say it's pointless for Trump to build a wall is because Chuck Norris walks to Mexico and back once a month. Ghosts tell Chuck Norris stories at the campfire. Burger King made their slogan "Have it your way" when Chuck Norris walked into their restaurant. Chuck Norris has a diary, it is called the Guinness Book of World Records.